Hi, welcome to the WAVY Digital Desk. We are here today with guests, going to speak with them about the Opioid, What Every Family Needs to Know program that aired on Saturday night. My name is Sarah Good, and we are partnering with the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation and Walmart, also in cooperation with the DEA. If you are looking to find us right now, we're on WAVY.com, Facebook, and YouTube. Facebook is going to have a discussion in the comments, so please, any comments and questions, leave them there. If you have not had a chance to watch the special, we link it in the description, and it is also available on WAVY.com. The special examines the opioid epidemic, from a local perspective and focuses on how this crisis impacts our schools, families, law enforcement, and healthcare systems. Today's live stream is an opportunity to hear more from our guests that are thankful for joining us today. And for the viewers, if you have questions from the program or if you are dealing with opioid addiction in your life or in your family's life or friends' lives, this is a good time to ask any questions to our panel. I want to introduce who we have with us today, starting with anchor Stephanie Hudson, anchor Chris Horne, and our special guest, thank you for joining us on Zoom, Antone Greene, Certified Prevention Specialist for the Hampton-Newport News Community Services Board. Carolyn Weems, an advocate. Carolyn lost her daughter Caitlin to opioid addiction. Thank you so much for being here with us. And Dr. Ben Fickenscher, emergency medicine at Chesapeake Regional Medical Center. So thank you all so much for joining us. We have a lot to get through today, but really appreciate you giving even more of your time following the program to spend with us. And we have people tuning in. They're watching from really all over the country. We have somebody here saying watching from Missouri, so you know this is an issue going on everywhere. We are talking about something specific, local, but obviously some of these are issues that different states and cities and towns face all over the United States. So I wanted to get started with the statistic that Stephanie gives at the beginning of the program. According to the Virginia Department of Health, more than 3,000 people have fatally overdosed on opioids in Hampton Roads since 2007, and fentanyl is 63% of those. So Dr. Fickenscher, I wanted to start with you, just talking about what we're seeing locally. I mean, can you tell us sort of what trends you're seeing in the ER?
Sure. And unfortunately, probably the scariest trend that began with the COVID pandemic continues, and that's that we've had people, fewer and fewer, come to the emergency department. We are seeing such a potent drug out there in fentanyl that many people who have been victims, when EMS arrives, they cannot be resuscitated because this is such a powerful drug. And then there's another cohort that is successfully resuscitated, but they have grown to be fearful of the emergency department because of the potential exposure to COVID. I think it's really important to remember these are people just like you and me, and everybody's concerned about getting exposed to COVID and other things, and then they're distrustful of the system, or at least feel that there's not any help to be offered, so why spend the time coming to the emergency department? So we've seen an explosion of our EMS and police being exposed to fatal or near fatal fentanyl overdoses, while seeing fewer arrive in the emergency department.
Wow, and that's interesting, I think, to any viewers out there, and we're going to get into Narcan later and some of these other methods for possibly treating addiction. But I mean, I think that's really interesting that people are not actually going to the hospitals when they're experiencing something. Stephanie, I wanted to go over to you, and I think this links with what Dr. Fickenscher just said about this idea that Jim Wahlberg shared with you, if you can touch on it a little bit, about how this does not discriminate. And I think that's something you've all echoed throughout the program, that hopefully we can get a side of everyone on that. But Stephanie, can you just give us some intel on what Jim shared about that message?
Absolutely. Before I do that, though, real quick, Sarah, if I could, just because it comes right off of what Dr. Fickenscher was saying, is that people are not going to the hospital, and some of that may be because they're with other people who are doing drugs, or maybe had supplied that drug, and those people are afraid that they're going to go to jail, they're going to get caught, something bad will happen to them. And there is something called the Good Samaritan Law in Virginia, so you can, and you absolutely should, if you're with somebody who is overdosing, take them to the hospital, take them to a fire station or EMS station, you will not be charged, because in Virginia, the law is on your side there. You're protected. Even if you are on drugs, you will not be charged that time. It's the most important thing is to get help for that person. So that said, Sarah, you were asking about what Mr. Wahlberg was talking about how parents, I think, are, they just don't know the extent of it a lot of times. And I found it really interesting that he said when he goes in to speak to these large auditoriums full of children, and it used to be, you know, he'd say, does anyone know anyone who's overdosed? You know, he said, well, when we were growing up, no, he really, most people really didn't. But he said he will have hands go up 80% of that large auditorium at a school of middle schoolers or even elementary school students know someone who has overdosed. And I think that's pretty eye-opening.
Absolutely. And Carolyn, you say this throughout the program, but, you know, you tell people it's not someone in a dark alley. You know, it's people in the classroom with you. It's people around you. And there is no one not affected by this, even if they are on honor roll, even if they are in activities. I mean, can you just speak to that sentiment that you share with so many?
Yes. Well, you know, we call it NIMBY, not in my backyard. Often we just say that's for other people who aren't as smart or who come from broken homes or, you know, who are really down on their luck, who aren't trying, who are worthless. But actually, you know, this drug, it does not discriminate. And just in the last couple of years, I mean, I've known the VCU salutatorium is no longer with us. A drummer in a local praise band is no longer with us. A baseball player, you know, a nursing student. So these are kids that had bright futures and they had hopes and dreams. And it's just the ordinary person that gets hooked accidentally, whether you're trying it for the first time at a party. In our case, Caitlin was prescribed it because of injuries, her back, and then a facial injury due to soccer. And, you know, she innocently got so addicted to it, and we had no clue of what we were dealing with. We were overwhelmed. And really, as parents, we just had no answers, no help, and it was very overwhelming and very, very difficult to navigate the complexities of addiction.
And Chris, you've known Carolyn for a while in your reporting. I mean, this story doesn't seem to have changed over the course, you know, of the last few years that you've known her. Can you just speak to that sort of continuation?
Sure. I met Carolyn. I met Dr. Fickenscher. I met Diana Mitchell, who's also featured prominently in the special, all through what was the Hampton Roads Opioid Task Force. It still exists, but it's not meeting as often as it was. Perhaps, you know, maybe that's something that has to be changed, but it was a renewal of those relationships that brought me to those individuals who played such a big part in the special. Back then, we were talking more, there was fentanyl on the horizon, but we were talking more about prescription painkillers, oxycodone, that were legitimate drugs, but people were overdosing on them because they didn't realize the potency of these legitimate drugs. Now, we're talking much more about disguised drugs, oxycodone, Xanax, Percocets that have fentanyl in them, fentanyl being this synthetic opioid that really is far more powerful than heroin, far more powerful than methadone. And I'm going to bring back in both Dr. Fickenscher and Carolyn, because another participant in our special was Dr. Jeffrey Wilson from CHKD, and he said, pay attention to the indicators. One of the indicators he mentioned, and we ran his story again today, was vaping. And I know when I talked with both you, Dr. Fickenscher and Carolyn, you have stories about vaping. Carolyn, let's start with you. You teach and you coach at the high school level, and you've talked with kids who are vaping and don't realize that that can be a route for fentanyl to get into their bodies.
Oh, yes. And the vaping, you know, unfortunately, the companies have done a great job marketing to kids. It's just vaping. Well, no, it's not just vaping. I was in a high school the other day with a presentation, and the kids came up and I asked what was the drug of choice in this particular school, and they said vaping. And I asked what was in it there, and they said THC. But of course, THC, it's at high levels. It used to be, you know, when you were smoking weed, it was at 2% THC. Now in these vapes, it's up between 20-25% THC. And a student came up to me and said, Ms. Weems, I admit it, I vape. I'm trying so hard to quit. Twice my vape has been laced with fentanyl without me knowing it. Mm-hmm. And I said, why are you taking the gamble? Why? And he said, I can't stop. I can't stop.
He's willing to play that Russian roulette that could be deadly and likely will be deadly after a certain period of time if he continues. Dr. Fickenscher, you told me about some high school students that got involved with fentanyl by vaping as well.
Yeah, and it was totally by accident. They were looking to use a THC enhanced vape, and both of them lost consciousness in their first period. And I want to be clear about it. These were different high schools, different days, different people. This was not two kids who got a hold of the same thing. And they both, I was incredulous. But after I asked many different ways about what happened, it was clear that I was getting the honest answer, that they had decided to use marijuana prior to school, and the next thing they knew, they were in an ambulance. And thank God the school system was equipped to act swiftly enough to get them help, and they got resuscitated with Narcan. But it is in everything. And I think you were talking about prescription opioids. I think that when the Hampton Roads Opioid Task Force was getting together, one of the big focuses was on educating physicians, reteaching doctors about the conversations we need to be having with families when we prescribe an opiate, that we need to be very clear that it's the lowest dose for the shortest time period possible, and only for severe pain that's not being controlled by Tylenol and ibuprofen and ice and all the other modalities that we have available to us. And I think we've done a reasonably good job undoing what Purdue Pharma was able to get into our medical educations. Unfortunately, it was met with some benefit, with some decrease in opioid deaths across our region. But now there is this fentanyl that is getting into every drug of abuse. And it really poses an incredible threat. And we were all talking about it prior to coming on today, that's the fact that it's in vapes has just changed the equation for me as a father. My 9-year-old and I are now having conversations about fentanyl. That's not something I really was prepared to start at 9, but he's seeing vapes at the neighborhood playground. So he needs to know that is not a curiosity that he can kind of check out once or twice, because the first time could be the last time.
Right, and you talk a lot about in the program about how kids cannot experiment. There is not room for that anymore, even if there ever was. I mean, especially now, you just don't know. And to Stephanie, I mean, showing the amount of fentanyl that is needed to cause an overdose is so minor. I mean, it's just such a tiny amount. Antone, what do you tell people? You do a lot of education, especially in this area. What do you start telling people, no matter how young they are, about not experimenting?
Well, yeah, it's important to have those conversations as early as possible. But just engaging in that conversation and letting them know that even the smallest amount, even experimenting with pill parties or alcohol or trying vapes could have adverse effect. As the campaign says, that one pill can kill. So just knowing that even if you're trying it for the first time, your body's getting used to that or exposed to that, so that it could have an adverse effect to that individual.
And Stephanie, that's something, and Chris brought this up, that the CHKD psychiatrist shared with you. Can you just talk about, he says being specific with that youth education about drugs?
Sure, and here's a good specific right now, as Antone just brought up, and some parents don't even know what he's talking about probably when he says a pill party. It's another very eye-opening thing to a lot of people, where kids will go into a party and everybody brings pills. So they might find them at home in their medicine cabinet, right? Or their friends or their grandparents. They just go in the medicine cabinet, see what's there, grab pills. Everybody comes into a party, throws them in a bowl, and people just take what they want. think about that for a minute. I mean, let that sink in. You don't know what you're taking. You have no idea how potent it is and prescribed for someone else. The doctor did say at that point too, sure, you've got to lock up, your medications. And again, Dr. Ben, what you just said is only taking it for a certain amount of time, only when it's needed, and then you need to get rid of it. Don't keep it at home. Unfortunately, that is what happened to Harmon Gherkin. I spoke with his mother, Lisa, for this special as well, and he was a depressed young man. He had just lost his father to cancer, and unbeknownst to them, he started taking his father's oxycodone. He took one pill, another day, another, just 3 pills, and he was hooked. And that's really all it takes. It can happen just taking it one time. Another interesting thing that we learned from CHKD was about children who have siblings who take drugs are 30% more likely to become addicts themselves. Is it because there's a family history? Maybe. Is it just because it's in the house and they're seeing it? That's possible too, but that's the statistic. Also, people who I spoke with were introduced to maybe not an opioid, but alcohol or marijuana at a very early age, and they were more likely to become addicted. So a couple of people that we talked to, Wahlberg for one, was saying that he was drunk at age, I think he said 4. No, he was 8. There was another woman I spoke with. She had been drunk at 4. He was drunk at age 8 because people in the neighborhood thought it'd be funny to give the little kid some alcohol and see what happens to him. He said, of course, that wasn't, the beginning of the end for me. I thought it was fun. I got a lot of attention. But then by the time he was 12, he'd moved on to smoking pot. And then it steamrolls. And that's kind of how it happens for some people. But interestingly, Sarah, there's different pathways for different people. And so you just have to be aware of what your children are doing, who they're friends with, and just stay involved in their lives. Check their phone. I mean, Chris did a story in this special about how drugs are showing up from your phone right to your doorstep. A lot of parents don't know their kids are on Snapchat, which, as a parent, I know it vanishes. That stuff's gone. You can't even go in and see what they were doing. So I would advocate for, watching even what apps you allow your child to have, because it's so easy to get and you'll never know it.
Chris, on that note, can you share a little bit? I know there will be more tonight on WAVY, but can you share a little bit about that social media drug connection?
Yeah, we talked with DEA Special Agent in charge, Jared Forget, and he's in charge of the agents in our region. And he said that social media is now the new street corner. It's not hand-to-hand exchanges, in back alleys and things like that. It's the regular web, it's the dark web, and it's also very common apps, like Stephanie mentioned, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and Snapchat, all these ones.
Even TikTok, that's a big one. A lot of kids
I should be mentioning TikTok.
Right.
TikTok's in the news so much lately these days. And that's where people are getting it, and they can deliver it right to your door. And all of this was sort of, the inflection point for all this was kind of the pandemic. We were siloed in our own homes, and our doctor's offices were closed, and we did so many things online that people started self-medicating online. And now the people who are pushing these drugs know how to adapt their business model. They know how people shop, so they cater to that, and they make these things available. But they're not marketed as fentanyl. They're marketed as Percocets or Xanax or oxycodone or whatever. And the fentanyl is inside it. So well done. And this is what Forget will say this evening. So well done, they can't even spot it. They have to send it off to a special lab to make sure that there is fentanyl in it. And it's so dangerous, they have to take precautions in handling it. It's just remarkable how this has exploded on the local drug scene with the help of technology.
And, Carolyn and Antone, what are some of those things that you tell kids maybe about social media in your work, if you guys touch on it, about, the dangers of it? We already worry about the dangers of how you look and certain things that we don't want kids to be fazed by. But what do you tell them now about, this more danger of drugs on social media? Antone, if you want to go first, I both see you reaching out to the mic.
Gotcha. So yeah, what we do in just educating just the social media use in general, but knowing your friends, knowing your circle and who you trust and what you interact, um, ways that you share and ways that you see like celebrities or other aspects is just a facade. So you're not really have to engage in that or put your whole life out on social media or expect that to come back forward. But just how you display and how you interact, just knowing having that small circle is best, not displaying for wide audience or likes.
Yeah, and we talked about that, just in the last few weeks at several presentations, and I got educated as well. And one of the students said, yeah, you now, if you want drugs delivered to you, you text a certain number, and this connects you to your plug. Your plug is now what is the drug dealer. You never meet the plug, you never do anything, but you text a number, and that drug can be delivered on the bleachers of the football field. And then you drop, you somehow you exchange money through, a money app on your phone or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just completely using social media. And so we tell the kids, again, you cannot trust anyone when it comes to drugs, because they can sit there and tell you it's pure Percocet, this is a Percocet, da-da-da. But if you do not see that being handed to you from a pharmacy, from a pharmacist, you can't trust it. And you certainly cannot trust who's on the other side of the, the app or the social media or where in the world or what in the world you're getting. And we also tell them, we've got a great speaker that says, you're being used. People are making money off of you. So you get on, you order all this stuff and you're the pawn, and then you're the plug of your school, and you're just being used. And they don't care. They'll take some deaths. They're not trying to kill people, but it's so addictive that they'll take some innocent accidental deaths. They don't care, because it's still hooking a lot more people. So social media is just devastating about how easily you can have it delivered to your front door or any location just through an app. Very scary.
And I think it's important, Carolyn and Antone, what you were talking, you talk about this, you can use it one time and it can kill you because you're getting something that's stronger than what you knew it was going to be. But even if you are lucky then enough to survive it, you still lose. That can be the beginning of a very, very slow end, as opposed to a very quick overdose end. That the world of with fentanyl, the switch between willful using it because you want to see what it feels like to having to have it and having it rule your life and the life of all those around you and destroying an entire family, it happens so quickly. So yeah, maybe you get away with it and you don't die when you try it, but it still could very well be the beginning of a very slow end of your life as you know it.
Yeah, I tell kids that these opioids will rewire your brain so much that it will cause you to do things and be the type of person that your friends, your parents, and even you yourself will not recognize, because your world will then become, how do I get this chemical so I can just feel normal? And your whole world rotates around getting that chemical so you're not so sick. And that involves lying, cheating, stealing, dropping out of school, living on the streets, whatever, to get that chemical.
And Antone, I wanted to bring it over to you, and then we have a few viewer questions that I did want to put out to the group. But Antone, can you just talk either from a prevention standpoint or from a standpoint of seeking help for addiction? What are some of the local resources that are available?
So as an individual, using Narcan or naloxone is one of the most powerful aspects of reversing that opioid overdose. It'll help but reverse that overdose to knock off those opioid in the brain receptors to allow that person to breathe again, and then get into the medical treatment that they might need. Also, there's medication-assisted treatment programs that help you get on some type of medication regular to help curb that addiction, and also just community support. So having those overall outside services, not just the medication component, but housing services or counseling and therapy to help curb those addictions and curb those outside determinants that make a person become addicted or opioid dependent.
Thank you. And I wanted to start with Carolyn. There was a question from you, from a viewer. They say, thank you for sharing your story. How can we help families struggling with the disease, and how can we show them we are here for them?
Well, I think the first thing is, to talk about it. I mean, I think we have gone, strides with the stigma. I know several times when we took our daughter to the hospital, we were not treated kindly by medical professionals. We were turned down at the psych center. I mean, so I think that's gotten better. But if you're a family, you have got to reach out to that family and just say, I'm here. I'm not going to judge you. We've got to get a recovery plan. You've really got to be in a long-term recovery plan. And I think also to tell families, which I wasn't really aware of it, is relapse is part of this brain disease. You are going to relapse, and it's not. And we often think, gosh, Caitlin, if you really wanted to stop, you just stop. Or I can't believe you were so stupid to relapse. It's just part of the disease, and you've got to just keep getting the help and the treatment. And we really need long-term treatment. So far there's been, it's a lot of this 28-day treatment that insurance will cover it. Not much can happen in 28 days. That's why I'm pushing really for a recovery school where these kids will be there, for the whole year. And we've got that on I think 7 college campuses here in Virginia, recovery places for college students.
Thank you for that question. And then there's another question. Are doctors trying to prescribe alternatives to opioids for surgery? And I think with sort of the big pharma conversation that's gone on, we can see that, doctors aren't really prescribing the same amount potentially of opioids, but we know it's still out there. Dr. Fickenscher, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, we have started prescribing less. But we also are much more likely to be writing prescriptions for Tylenol, for naproxen, for ibuprofen. And I think we need to rewire what people think about pain medicine. Pain medicine for a long time, saying that was synonymous with opioids. And we need to start to get people thinking that, no, ibuprofen, even though it's just over the counter or it's available over the counter, is a very strong painkiller, and that an expectation or an anticipation that you could have surgery, or you could sprain your ankle or break your ankle and have zero pain while you recovered from that injury is not an endpoint that we want. It's not a healthy. We need pain to tell us when we're pushing our limits. We need pain to let us know when something is going on that's wrong. And so a recovery without pain is not the target. That's not the ideal. It should be that you're comfortable enough to get sleep, to be able to function, but zero pain is not what we want. And so specific to, are we using alternatives to opioids? Yes, we're using Tylenol and ibuprofen, and I think people need to get away from feeling like that's a slap in the face, like, oh, so you're not going to give me anything. No, those are powerful. But then we also are experimenting with things like ketamine for pain control and some other non-opioid drugs. But I think it's important for people to bear in mind that as we move away from opioids and potentially start experimenting with other drugs, there is no drug that has zero side effects, or that has zero downside, or has zero potential for dependence. And so, my fear being that we start to explore alternatives and find that that suddenly we're dealing with something else that was an unintended consequence.
Thank you. And Stephanie and Chris, you guys have lived close to this in your reporting. I mean, are there any major questions or revelations that you all heard that you think are important, to mention, at least in this discussion?
One thing that Carolyn and I talked about when we were over at her home, and we interviewed her and Diana Mitchell at the same time, and they've done some presentations side by side, and also they do their own individual advocacy. But Carolyn, you mentioned, and we put in the special about the billboard campaign. And the fact that Caitlin is one of the several young people who are memorialized in that campaign who have died of opioids here in Hampton Roads. And we talk about stigma, but you said the stigma still is present when you try to recruit some families who, had a loss similar to yours.
Yes, right, because they're just, it's still, the stigma's there. They're embarrassed because automatically the finger gets pointed to the parent. You were not a good enough parent, and that's why your child ended up doing drugs. That's why your child became addicted. You either have a broken home, you didn't parent, you were too strict, you were not strict enough, you had too much faith, not any faith. I mean, it goes on and on. And so, yeah, so I reached out, and several parents said, no, I'm not gonna, no, it's just too hard. I don't want it out there. And, and again, we've got to break that stigma. We've got to deal with this as a medical, mental, it's a brain disease, and we've got to be able to talk about it and reach out to people and say, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But we're going to get help and we're going to move forward. So, I feel like I've just been beating the drum for 10 years and my child's like the poster child for this. And that's fine, but we need more people to speak up, and we need people that are recovering from this addiction to speak up also, because they have a huge voice. But again, a lot of them afraid. A lot of them, I know one of Caitlin's friends ended up moving away for 2 years, as she told me afterwards, that she was in rehab in a different state, but she didn't want anybody to know, so she, moved away. So we've got to have these people in recovery to be peer specialists and to speak out and say there is hope, but there's no shame in this addiction. You've just got to you've got to get help and get better and recover.
So I think one of the stories I heard, so many, I was going to ask Sarah, like, how much time do we have? Because I have a lot of things that open my eyes in this reporting. But one of them, interesting, from Lisa Gherkin, who said, even when her son was on the path to recovery and he was trying to get help, she took him to Narcotics Anonymous, which she says is a wonderful organization. They do a lot of good. However, as he's leaving, the drug dealers know where they're meeting, and they hang out there. They were hanging out in the bushes, so to speak, right outside. So when you walk out of that meeting, and they specifically would prey on the younger kids who were coming out of those meetings. So it seemed for her like there's a roadblock. There's so many roadblocks all the way down. The other thing was money. Insurance didn't cover the cost of all of the rehab, all the stints that he did. He was in 6 different times. It financially almost broke her, basically. So I think we also need to work on insurance companies, and along, Carolyn, you said, with more recovery options, we need people to have help to pay for those as well. And when you think of all the money that we lose, if you have to talk money to somebody to make them get help, if we talk about all the money we're going to lose by the lost productivity and people being in jail and people going in and out of rehab, I mean, it is in the long run going to save us money to have these kinds of facilities that insurance will pay for, that will help. I say kids, but we've been talking a lot about kids today, but kids, adults, whoever needs the help, the long-term help. And then the final thing that she brought up that was interesting to me, you said a friend of your daughter's went out of state. She said when Harmon went out of state, he came back, it was about 1.5 years, and he was just like a new man. He was ready to go and conquer the world. But once he came back home, it was like, oh, I'm in this familiar territory. I'm in this territory where I did feel like almost discriminated against, right? Or I felt less than. I felt like people were looking at me because they knew what I'd done. They knew that I had been in jail. They knew, that I'd stolen to get this drug. They knew that, my life was falling apart. So you kind of gravitate back towards those people who accepted you. And unfortunately, those people who accepted you here were the ones probably who you were doing drugs with or getting the drugs from. So I guess, I'm not advocating, obviously, for people to move away to get better. But, Carolyn, maybe what you said is if we have rehab facilities here where people do feel accepted, and we can kind of normalize is a bad word, but the conversation could be normalized. We could talk about it without feeling like, like we should be hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, no other, disease or medical condition do you have to choose recovery or education or family. And in this one, in many cases, you do have to choose one of those 3.
And we see a lot of people who become incarcerated, and they are forced into abstinence during their incarceration. And so they are no longer chemically dependent on opioids when they come out months or years later. But they go, as you said, Stephanie, they go back into the same neighborhood with the same influences. And so, right, we need to have recovery exist for people in the places where they live and work and are educated and function, because involving family and friends and the community is such a big part of supporting them through that. The other thing that I would advocate for is for people to be aware of medication-assisted treatment. And in some ways, it is substituting one dependency for another. But I think when you are talking about all of the negative things that come along with illicit drug use, I think it's a worthwhile trade-off. So using Suboxone as part of a program of counseling and of involving the community and family, and it's not a standalone silver bullet on its own for sure, but it can stave off the cravings to use. But it has a benefit that some people don't know about, and that's that if you choose to use while on Suboxone, it actually has a protective effect, because you already have saturated your receptors with that alternative drug, and it keeps you from getting the full punch, if you will, from something that you were to use illicitly, and it reduces the likelihood that you're going to overdose. And affords you that opportunity to say, wait, that wasn't what I was supposed to do. That's not where I want to be. And to continue your recovery despite having relapse, like Carolyn said, which is a part of the disease. So Chesapeake Emergency Room, we've got a program that we started called the PROUD program. It is a program to try to get people started on Suboxone and then handed over to ongoing treatment at our CSBs and other treatment providers. And so that's just my one plug. It's not a moneymaker. It's there to be a service to the community. So if you have somebody you know, or if you yourself are mired in addiction and you don't know where to turn, we do have a program set up to try to get you started in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Fickenscher. We've gone a few minutes over, but I did want to ask one question that was asked twice in our chat here, which does make sense in sort of living day to day for Antone. They're asking, what are the best ways to keep medications away from those it's not prescribed to? I mean, in a day-to-day household, you're going to have people that do have prescriptions, but what is the best way to keep the whole family safe?
So investing in a medication lock pouch or lockbox, keeping your medication high, hidden, away from reach of children, reach of others, especially if people are in and out your household, but just making sure that your medication is locked up and safe, and out of reach of others to go through your items.
Thank you. And I know that you all are, so well versed in this topic, and we could speak about it probably for another hour, but I did want to wrap it up just by saying that WAVY.com has a whole list of resources available. You can go back and watch the program and see who our panelists are and see some of the resources that are available locally. So please head over to WAVY.com. The link is also in the event page here if you are interested in that. And this discussion will also live here. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can direct you all to the WAVY.com page. So thank you so much to all of you, Antone, Carolyn, Dr. Fickenscher, and then Stephanie Hudson and Chris Horne for being with us today in their report and bringing awareness. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you all for making this program and this panel happen.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.